The passenger door was locked. He knew it was. He'd heard the click. The seatbelt was still buckled, stretched tight across an empty space. But the seat itself, the seat was cold. Not just empty, but cold, as if no one had been sitting there for hours. He'd only looked away for a second, a quick glance in the rearview mirror. But in that single heartbeat, his passenger had simply ceased to be. She didn't open the door. She didn't unbuckle the belt. She just vanished. And in her place, a chilling silence and a single, terrifying question that would unravel his entire understanding of reality. Who, or what, had just been in his car? Some roads just feel like they're trying to be forgotten. They're asphalt ghosts, winding through landscapes time left behind, their edges slowly being eaten by weeds and wilderness. Route 44 was one of those roads. It was a relic, a tangled ribbon of cracked pavement that snaked through the state's dense northern forests. Most modern GPS systems politely ignored it, favoring the newer, wider, and infinitely more sensible interstate about 20 miles east. For Mark Chamberlain, though, Route 44 wasn't a choice. It was a necessity. He was an architectural surveyor, a man whose job was to catalog the past, to measure and photograph old buildings before they were torn down or restored. His current project? A series of abandoned 19th-century mills, forgotten titans of industry now slumbering in ivy-choked valleys. It was solitary work that demanded long hours and even longer drives. Tonight was no exception. The sun had set hours ago, leaving behind a bruised purple sky that quickly sank into a starless, impenetrable black. A thick, cloying fog was rolling in from the marshlands, cutting as high beams ranged down to maybe 50 feet. The ancient trees lining the road loomed like silent, skeletal giants, their branches clawing at the mist. The air inside his reliable but aging sedan was stale, smelling faintly of old coffee and his rain-soaked wool coat. Mark was tired. It was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that comes from 12 hours of clambering through decaying structures, his ears still ringing with the ghostly echoes of silent machinery. All he wanted was his small, rented cabin, a hot meal, and the oblivion of sleep. Mark was a man of logic and reason, of blueprints and stress calculations. His world was made of tangible things: wood, stone, and steel. He believed in what he could see, touch, and measure. The supernatural? That was for other people, for late-night radio shows and pulp paperbacks. He found comfort in the predictable, in the solid ground beneath his feet. But the road seemed determined to challenge that. Every curve felt tighter than he remembered, every dip more jarring. The fog swirled in his headlights, creating fleeting, unsettling shapes in his peripheral vision. A deer, a falling branch, a trick of the light. He repeated this to himself like a mantra. There was nothing out here but trees, asphalt, and the occasional raccoon. He was alone, utterly alone. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers and the low hum of the engine. He'd tried the radio an hour ago, but got nothing but static, as if the fog itself were smothering the signal. It was the kind of quiet that makes you hyper-aware of your own heartbeat. He took a sip of lukewarm water, his eyes scanning the narrow patch of road ahead. This particular stretch of Route 44 had a reputation, not that he put much stock in local superstitions. The old-timers in the nearest town called it the Widow's Run. They told stories of strange lights and phantom cars that would appear in a rearview mirror only to vanish. And they told stories of her, the girl on the road, a ghost story to keep people on the safer, more modern highways. Mark had dismissed it all as folklore, the kind of myth-making that springs up in isolated places to explain away a creepy, winding road. Tragic accidents happen. Roads like this are treacherous. It's only natural for people to populate them with ghosts, to give a face to their fear. It was a psychological coping mechanism, nothing more. He was a man of facts, and the fact was, he was just driving home on a foggy night. But as the miles crawled by, a small, unwelcome seed of unease began to sprout in his logical, well-ordered mind. The road was long, and the night was far from over. It was how suddenly she appeared that was so jarring. One moment, there was nothing but swirling gray fog. The next, she was just there, a silhouette on the fragile edge of the road, as if she had materialized right out of the mist. Mark's foot slammed on the brake, his heart leaping into his throat. The tires screeched on the slick pavement as the car shuddered to a halt. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He just stared, his breath catching in his chest. She didn't move. She just stood there, a frail-looking figure in the glow of his headlights. She wore a simple, light-colored dress that looked all wrong for the damp chill of the night. Her dark hair hung loosely around her shoulders, beaded with moisture from the fog. She wasn't holding a sign or sticking out her thumb. She just waited, her stillness almost profound, looking directly at his car. Mark's mind raced, logic and primal fear colliding. Who in their right mind would be out here, in the middle of nowhere, at this hour, in this weather? Did her car break down? He scanned the road behind and ahead of her. No other vehicles, no blinking hazard lights. Nothing. Just the girl, the road, and the silent, oppressive forest. His first instinct, the one born from a lifetime of city-bred caution, was to drive away. Lock the doors, hit the gas, and don't look back. This is how horror stories begin, right? This is the mistake the fool in the movie always makes. But another, more compassionate part of him fought back. She looked young, maybe college-aged. What if she was in trouble, hurt or lost? Leaving her out here in the cold, miles from anywhere, felt cruel. He was a good person. He couldn't just abandon someone. He watched her for a long moment, the engine idling, the wipers keeping their steady, hypnotic rhythm. She didn't shiver. She didn't try to wave him down. She simply held his gaze, a silent figure against the vast, dark tapestry of the night. His brain told him it was a risk. His gut told him it was the right thing to do. With a deep sigh of resignation, a decision made against his better judgment, he flicked the switch to unlock the passenger door. The sound echoed, unnaturally loud. He leaned over and pushed the door open, a silent invitation. She didn't react for a moment. Then, with a slow, almost graceful movement, she walked to the car and slid into the passenger seat. The heavy door shut behind her, the latch clicking with a finality that seemed to seal them both inside, cut off from the rest of the world. The lonely drive was over. The real journey had just begun. The change inside the car was immediate. The air, already cool, seemed to drop several more degrees, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the fog. Mark felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. Just the open door, he told himself, a rationalization that already felt thin. "Thanks," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, but strangely distant, like it was coming through water. It sounded formal, old-fashioned. "No problem," Mark replied, his own voice sounding rough. He cleared his throat. "Car trouble." She turned to look at him, and he saw her face clearly for the first time in the dim glow of the dashboard. She was beautiful, but in an unsettling way. Her skin was almost translucent, and her large, dark eyes seemed to hold a profound, ancient sadness. "You could say that," she answered, her gaze drifting back to the road. "I just need to get home." "Where's home?" Mark asked, putting the car back in drive. "Not far. Just up the road a few miles. The old Blackwood place. On the left." Mark frowned. He didn't know the names of the old properties. "I'm not from around here. You'll have to point it out." "I will," she said, her voice a near whisper. "I know the way." An awkward, heavy silence fell between them. Mark fought the urge to fill it with chatter, but what could he even say? He was intensely curious, but asking more questions. "Who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you dressed like that?" Felt like an intrusion. He risked a sideways glance. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her simple, white dress was immaculate, with no sign of dirt or dampness from the fog, which was odd. She sat perfectly still, her posture unnervingly rigid. She wasn't fidgeting or looking at a phone. She didn't seem to have one. She just stared forward into the mist. So, Mark began, the silence stretching his nerves thin. Coming from a party or something? She didn't look at him. Something like that. A dance. A dance? The words sounded archaic. Must have ended late, he offered. It ended a long time ago, she said, her voice laced with that same strange melancholy. Before Mark could even process that, the car's radio crackled to life. Not music, not a talk show, but a burst of static-laden, old-timey music, a faint, tinny waltz from another century. It played for maybe 10 seconds before cutting out, plunging them back into silence. Weird, Mark muttered, tapping the console. Things been on the fritz all night. His passenger said nothing. She seemed completely unfazed, as if she hadn't even heard it. The chill in the car deepened, and Mark could now see his own breath misting in the air. He cranked up the heat, but the air from the vents felt impossibly cold. A shiver, and not entirely from the cold, traced its way down his spine. They drove on, the headlights cutting a lonely tunnel through the dark. He wanted to believe this was all a product of his tired mind, a series of coincidences on a spooky night. There had to be a rational explanation for everything. The girl was eccentric. The radio was faulty. The cold was harder to explain. It felt like it was radiating directly from her, a pocket of deep winter in his passenger seat. He remembered the local legends then, the stories of the widow's run. He tried to push the thought away, to focus on the steering wheel in his hands, the road unspooling before him. But the stories persisted, whispering at the edges of his consciousness. The legend was a classic. A traveler picks up a hitchhiker who vanishes from the moving car. Later, the driver learns his passenger was the ghost of someone who had died on that same road years before. It was an archetype, a story found in cultures all over the world. And as he drove through the fog with his silent, sorrowful passenger, he couldn't shake the terrifying feeling that he was living it. "It's just up here," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through his thoughts. The next driveway. On the left. Mark looked ahead and saw it. A narrow, unpaved driveway flanked by two crumbling stone pillars, barely visible behind overgrown lilac bushes. It led towards a large, dark shape he assumed was the house. It looked derelict. No lights were on. "Are you sure?" he asked, slowing the car. "It doesn't look like anyone's home." "This is it," she insisted, her voice firm. "This is my home." He turned off the road, the tires crunching loudly on the gravel. He stopped the car about 30 yards from the dark, hulking structure. The place looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Windows were boarded up, the porch roof sagged. This couldn't be right. He turned to her, ready to demand an explanation. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words died in his throat. He turned his head to the right. "Are you absolutely sure?" He stopped. The seat was empty. His mind just refused to accept what his eyes were seeing. It had to be a glitch, a trick of his exhausted brain. He blinked hard, expecting her to reappear, but the seat remained vacant. A wave of vertigo washed over him. The passenger door was still locked. He would have heard it open. The seatbelt was still fastened, stretched across the empty seat. He'd heard it click. He reached out a trembling hand and touched the fabric where she had been sitting. It was cold, a deep, penetrating cold, as if it hadn't been warmed by a human body just moments before. Panic, sharp and icy, pierced through his fatigue. His heart hammered against his ribs. He fumbled for the overhead light, flooding the car's interior with a weak, yellow glow that only confirmed the impossible. She was gone. Not escaped. Simply gone. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. He just sat there, staring at the empty seat, his mind a whirlwind of terror. He scanned the dark woods surrounding the driveway, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. Only the fog-draped woods and the derelict house. His first rational thought was a desperate one. Maybe she had somehow slipped out while he was turning into the driveway. It was clumsy, but it was something to hold on to. He scrambled out of the car. "Hello," he called out, his voice sounding small and thin. "Are you out there?" Only the dripping of water from the trees answered. "This isn't funny," he shouted, hysteria creeping in. The silence that met his shout was absolute and terrifying. He walked around the car. The passenger door was shut securely. The back seat was empty. He was alone. And now a choice. Every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to get back in the car, reverse out of there as fast as he could, and never look back. Drive to the nearest town, call the police, and try to explain the inexplicable. It was the same thing to do. But another, more powerful urge held him there. A need to understand. A desperate curiosity that was even stronger than his fear. He couldn't just drive away and live with the not knowing, with this impossible hole torn in his reality. The girl had brought him to this specific house. She called it her home. The answers, he felt with a certainty that defied all logic, were inside that dark, silent house. He looked from the empty passenger seat to the sagging porch of the abandoned building. He could either flee the mystery or walk directly into its heart. He took a deep breath, the cold night air burning his lungs. With a grim determination that surprised even himself, he turned from his car and started walking towards the front door. He had to know. Every crunch of his shoes on the gravel seemed to magnify the silence. The house loomed larger, more menacing with each step. Up close, its decay was stark. Paint peeled from the siding like sunburnt skin. The porch steps groaned under his weight. He raised a trembling hand and knocked. The sound was dull, absorbed by the rotting wood. He waited, his heart pounding. Just as he was about to turn away, he heard it, the slow, deliberate scrape of a bolt being drawn inside. The door creaked open, revealing a sliver of warm, yellow light. An old man stood there, small and frail, with thin white hair and eyes clouded with a deep, settled sadness. He peered at Mark with weary confusion. "Can I help you?" the old man asked, his voice raspy. I'm sorry to bother you so late," Mark stammered, feeling like a fool. "My name is Mark. I think I just gave your daughter a ride home." The old man's expression didn't change. He just stared. From deeper within the house, a woman's voice called out, "Who is it, Arthur?" An elderly woman appeared at the man's shoulder. She had the same tired eyes, the same aura of gentle grief. She looked at Mark, then at the empty driveway behind him, and a flicker of pity and understanding passed across her face. "Oh, you poor man," she said, her voice soft. "You saw her too, then?" Mark was speechless. "Saw who?" "I just dropped off a young woman. She said this was her home. She told me her name was..." He trailed off, realizing with a jolt that she had never told him her name. The old man, Arthur, finally spoke, his voice heavy. "Our daughter, Eliza, passed away 20 years ago tonight." The woman continued, her eyes glistening. "She was coming home from the autumn dance. There was an accident on Route 44, not 2 miles from here. She was killed instantly." The air left Mark's lungs in a rush. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying finality. The old-fashioned dress, the dance, the overwhelming sadness, the impossible disappearance. It wasn't a trick. It was exactly what the legends described. "Every year," the old woman said, her voice trembling, "on the anniversary, a kind traveler like yourself stops by. They all tell the same story. They picked up our Eliza. She asked for a ride home, and then she's gone. You're not the first, son, and I fear you won't be the last." Mark stood frozen on the porch, his entire fact-based worldview demolished. He muttered his apologies and stumbled back to his car in a daze. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't rationalize it. He had to understand it. The next day, he drove not to his work sites, but to the town library. He needed more than one elderly couple's story. He needed proof. In the dusty corner of the library, A helpful librarian led him to a microfiche machine. For hours, Mark scrolled through grainy, black and white newspapers. And then he found it. A headline from 20 years ago to the day. Local teen killed in tragic accident. The article had a faded photo of a young woman with large, dark eyes. It was her. It was Eliza. He read the details of the crash, a story that solidified the impossible, grounding the spectral encounter in historical tragedy. But his search didn't end there. As he dug deeper, he found that Eliza's story was just one branch on a vast, ancient tree. What he'd experienced was a textbook example of the Vanishing Hitchhiker, one of the world's most pervasive paranormal legends. He read about Resurrection Mary, perhaps America's most famous version, a ghost who haunts a road in Chicago, asking for rides home from dance halls before disappearing near a cemetery. The parallels were uncanny. He learned these ghostly passengers often fall into distinct types. Some, like Eliza, seem to be spirits bound to the place of their death, forever reliving their final journey. Others are said to be prophetic. He read accounts where the hitchhiker delivers a dire warning of a disaster or even the driver's own death before vanishing. The sheer volume of these stories was staggering, embedded in the folklore of countless communities. For Mark, a man of concrete facts, this library archive was a portal into another reality, where the line between the living and the dead was as thin as the fog on a dark country road. The story of Eliza is just one of thousands, a modern ghost story that echoes through time. The line between documented history and folklore is often blurred, leaving us with more questions than answers. What do you think Mark encountered that night? A restless spirit? A psychic projection? Let us know your theories in the comments. And if you have your own local version of this legend, we want to hear it. Leaving the library that evening felt like stepping back into a world that was no longer his. The sun was setting. People were heading home, their lives filled with the mundane routines that had, until 2 nights ago, defined Mark's own existence. But for him, everything had changed. The world no longer seemed so solid. He now knew there were cracks in the foundation of reality, and he'd stumbled right into one. The man who drove away from that town wasn't the same man who had driven into it. The pragmatic surveyor had been replaced by someone more uncertain. He finished his work at the old mills, but his mind wasn't on it. He saw the decaying buildings not just as structures, but as containers of time and memory. The world had gained a new, haunting dimension. On his last night, he felt an irresistible pull to drive Route 44 one more time. He wasn't looking for her. He knew she wouldn't be there. Her anniversary had passed. He just needed to see the road again in the light of his new knowledge. He pulled over at the sharp curve where he'd first seen her. He got out and stood there, looking at the spot where she had materialized. He thought about their strange conversation. Her cryptic words now had a chilling clarity. It ended a long time ago, she had said of the dance. She was being literal. He thought of her parents, their grief perpetually refreshed by kind strangers bringing them the same impossible story. For them, her ghost wasn't a terrifying apparition, but a final, fleeting echo of their daughter. The experience had changed him. He no longer dismissed ghost stories with a skeptic's easy wave. He understood that these stories, true or not, serve a deep human purpose. They're maps of grief, cautionary tales, and expressions of our profound hope and fear about what lies beyond death. The legend of the Vanishing Hitchhiker persists not just because it's scary, but because it speaks to our most fundamental questions about life, loss, and connection beyond the grave. The encounter on Route 44 was the defining, unexplainable event of Mark Chamberlain's life. A single tear in the fabric of his orderly world. Yet, it connected him to a global tapestry of mystery, woven from countless similar tales. The Vanishing Hitchhiker is more than a legend. It's a modern myth that reflects our anxieties about the lonely, dark roads we all have to travel. These stories force us to confront the boundaries of our own understanding. Are they just psychological projections of our fears? Or are they genuine glimpses into a world beyond our own? Encounters with souls caught in a loop, forever trying to get home. There's no definitive proof. There are only the stories. The accounts of countless drivers like Mark, who set out on an ordinary trip and came back forever changed by the passenger who was never really there at all. The legend endures because it leaves us with a chilling question. The next time you on a dark, deserted road and see a lone figure in the shadows, what will you do?